Welcome back. Just as we are looking at the return of Christ, the timing of the return of Christ, and how important that is to being prepared for that season, and also understanding that as believers, we do go through crisis and we go through tribulation, but yet the Lord strengthens us in that season, in that period, that we would be victorious over the enemy. And so in little crisis, we see God's intervention. And then also in the large crisis, we see God's intervention in that time. But we don't see this escaping reality where we just don't go through it and God raptures us out of that. And so what I want to do here in this video is actually look at, if you're new to this, what are we talking about tribulation and the timing of Christ? And so what we understand through Daniel, and I would encourage you as I look at these verses to see them in your own Bible. Again, don't just take my word, because you want to look at this scripture and then you want to look at the context of that scripture, because it's so easy to pull a scripture out of context to make it fit what we want want it to say. And so when we're looking at Daniel, especially the last chapters of Daniel, when you're looking at Daniel 7 and 8, all the way to the end of Daniel 12, it's really talking about the figure of the Antichrist that's going to come onto the scene, and then how Jesus is going to overthrow that Antichrist and usher in his eternal, perfect, righteous kingdom and do away with sin completely. And so here, there's several verses that connect this timeline, but we see it all together in Daniel 9, verse 27. And speaking about the Antichrist, he goes, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. Now that 7, if you take some time to kind of break that down, speaks of either 1 week or the 7 years. And so here what we have is this is 7 years that he's speaking about, that the Antichrist will establish a covenant with Israel and other nations, and it's a peace covenant. It's to make peace with them. But what he does is in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offerings. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed and is poured out on him. Now, so here is what we call the tribulation, the 7 years of tribulation, where this peace covenant is created. But then it gets, and you can see this through Daniel, but specifically in Matthew 24, Jesus picks up this prophecy that Daniel gives, and he calls it the tribulation time. And what it is specifically at when that middle, in the middle of the covenant, when it's broken by the Antichrist, we have 3.5 years that are left. And the 3.5 years is called the Great Tribulation. And that Great Tribulation is the intensity where the Antichrist begins to wage war against the saints. He begins to destroy Israel. He comes after anybody that holds the testimony of Jesus. And we'll see that in Revelation later in the study. But just so you have this grid work, and I'm hoping to be able to get this timeline just up there. You can see the verses, so you have an idea of what we're talking about with pre-tribulation and post-tribulation. And Jesus refers to this in Daniel 24, verse 15. He goes, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. And he continues to go and talk about the response that we would have when the Antichrist begins to break that covenant. So he's taking this Matthew 25, the eschatology of this verse leading up to Jesus's return, and he uses the Daniel prophecy of the 7 years, which will be broken in the middle for the 3.5 years, as that time of crisis. Now, we also see, if we turn to Revelation 12, when he talks about, actually Revelation 12 and 13, But I want to reference Revelation 13, verse 5, because he brings this timeline into the context of when Satan's rage will be manifested in the earth through the Antichrist. And he says in verse 5, the beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blaspheme and to exercise its authority for 42 months. And so that 42 months, again, is this last 3.5 years of the tribulation of this age. And what will end that last 3.5 years is Jesus's return with the saints to set up his eternal kingdom, and it'll bring us into the millennium. And so I wanted to have us have just a timeline, a grid work of what we're talking about when I say post-tribulation and pre-tribulation. And so if those are new terms for you, that 7 years is the last 7 years that this age will exist before Jesus begins to set up his eternal kingdom. And what some would believe is that we would be raptured before the 7 years, before that crisis. And then some might even say before the last 3.5 years. And we would call that a pre-wrath or mid-trib view. But what we're looking mostly at is pre-trib and post-trib. And the pre-tribulation view says that, hey, we're not going to go through the 7 years. Jesus is going to come. We won't necessarily see him. He'll be in the sky. The believers then will just be raptured up to him. And everyone else will be left kind of looking around like, hey, what happened? Where did everybody go? Post-tribulation believes that we will go, and this is where I land, we'll go through the tribulation, and Jesus will strengthen us in that tribulation as Satan's waging war against us, but we're also preaching the gospel and seeing salvation come forth. And then after, when he comes, he raptures us to him, and he continues into the earth to destroy wickedness and sin forever and set up his eternal kingdom. And so, hey, if that's new to you, I just wanted to have that part so you knew before we looked at the verses of post-tribulation or pre-tribulation views, you would have a reference to go off. So again, during this video, I'm hoping to have that timeline up there so you can see it and you can reference it. You can see some of the scriptures within it, and then be able to work through the scriptures in these next videos. So, hey, I hope this helps, and I will see you in the next video.